Who wants to give a little recap of what the story's about?
So from my recollection of this passage, what I do remember is that it's about like this big town meeting. It's like a traditional thing. And they have this drawing of these paper slips, and whoever gets the dot has to die. It's a bit ridiculous, but it happens.
Right.
And it ended horribly because I don't know what else happens.
It just ends. It ends like it ends, right? It ends with the woman pulling the black dot, and what are the townspeople doing?
Throwing rocks at her.
Yes, they're getting the rocks ready to throw the stones at her. So that's where that's the end of the story, and that shocked a lot of us because we can't believe that these townspeople are willing to do this. I was trying to think of a story that was short, but that I really enjoyed, and I remembered as a student reading the lottery. I mean, I can remember reading that story my freshman year of high school. I can remember the desk that I sat in when you get to the end and you're like, what? You know they're going to kill her? So I thought that that would be a good story to kind of get them involved, and also it's not, the language is not difficult, the concepts are not that difficult. I think it was an easily approachable text for a 10th grade student. She is a mom. She has children, a husband, and they have no qualms about stoning her because it's part of their tradition. So if you guys remember, the question that's framing our study of this text, of this short story by Shirley Jackson, is this: at what point should an obedient citizen refuse to follow his government's rules or the traditions of his culture? And way back when we started this, we had a little anticipation guide. So if you have that, let's look at this real quick and see what kind of things you had to say before we started studying this story. So when we first started studying this, on the first day, we read a couple of articles about teenagers doing bad things. Remember the one about the group of kids who basically killed that horse for fun, and you had your reaction to that. The one about the kid who gets arrested after driving all crazy, and then he's got a ton of drugs in his car, so he gets arrested for that. And then the students who were expelled for cheating. So we read about that and we had some of our reactions. And then before we ever even read the lottery, you guys you answered this question. On your perspective, at what point should an obedient citizen refuse to follow his government's rules or the traditions of his culture? And I asked you at that point, without having read the lottery, do you think that you should never go against tradition? That only in extreme circumstances should one go against tradition? And from very early on, should you largely ignore the government or societal tradition? So let's do a show of hands. How many of you said never? You should always follow government laws. In the beginning, be honest. Before you read the lottery, who said government laws should always be followed? Okay, 2. Who said only in extreme circumstances should you disregard societal laws and conventions? Okay, and did anyone say from very early on you should blow off government rules? Good, okay. All right, so we don't have we don't have no anarchists in here, which is very good. Excellent. Okay, and then lastly, I believe I asked you to give, did I ask you to answer number 3? Yes, you had to give your own personal views after we read the story the first time, at what point. So this was post our first reading of the lottery. At what point should you refuse to follow the government's rules? So do I have a brave volunteer to share at what point they think to discuss this? Okay, Jordan is going to.
I said, I believe that a citizen should almost always follow the government's rules or the traditions of his or her culture. From the government's perspective, I believe citizens should respect the position and authority of the government to a certain extent. If a law goes strongly against one's beliefs, I believe it is okay to not follow the laws as long as the person isn't loud and proud with it, knowing they will get caught breaking the law.
Kristen, what did you say?
Only in extreme circumstances should an obedient citizen disregard the government's laws. I say this because through our study with Antigone, the government doesn't always correspond with religious morals, and this is very important to me. The government is human, so not everything they declare can be right, just like not everything we do or say is right. Personally, if it involves my faith or a life or death situation, I'd be willing to break the law and reap the consequences. I think it's more important to follow what you believe is right compared to what the government declares is right.
What was our goal the first time we read? Why do I have all of these letters and little things here? What were we doing the first time we read this story? An A?
Marking if it was a tradition or like. You talking about what the T's?
Yeah.
For?
Why were we? What was all
like
this for?
Tradition to like show anytime like cultural things come out, and the R stood for like the citizen, like the law, government. I guess.
The citizen's reaction to that. Very
reaction.
good. Okay, so you remember we were text coding. So as we read the first time, we were marking whether we were seeing anytime we put a T anytime it dealt with a cultural tradition or a law, and we put an R whenever we had reactions to that cultural tradition or law. So if you go back and you just look through our story, you can see all of the codes that we made. A lot of traditions. This whole story is about this tradition of this town who every year for the harvest, right before the harvest, they choose one person to kill. And we haven't quite gotten into what we think about that. We didn't touch on that too much about why do we think that this is. So what our job today is we're going to be questioning the text a little deeper, and we're going to work on coming up with deep questions, because as almost AP students, one more quarter guys, and you're 11th graders, you need to be able to ask intelligent and deep questions about the text. Well, I think that part of the release of responsibility as a teacher is to show them how to do it and gradually encourage them and help them to figure out how to do these things for themselves. So I always try to start a lesson modeling what I would do as a student and when I approach this text, so that they can get more comfortable with the process of annotating, highlighting, and questioning as well. I think remembering as a student, the easiest way to learn is by seeing it yourself. And so I think that if I just stood up there and said, okay, here's the 3 different types of questions, now you make some up, that would have been a very daunting task, and kind of one of those moments where you just sit there staring at the paper and nothing happens. But there didn't really seem to be any hesitation with the kids in making up their questions. Like they kind of, when I turned it to them, they dove right into it and I didn't notice that they were feeling that they couldn't do this. But it's really hard to make up those deeper level questions. And I don't think they noticed that it was difficult. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick little mini lesson. So let's switch over here and look at the board here. And that'll be fine. Okay, we're going to be dealing with 3 types of questions today. But the first type of question is one I'm going to want you to avoid, because the first type of question, there's really 3 types of questions when you're a student in academics. The first one are those factual questions, the right there questions. You can look on the page and find the answer. What is the name of the woman who was stoned? Okay. What is the name of the man who directed the lottery? These types of questions are found right on the page, and they answer the 5 W's. Raise your hand. What's the 5 W's? Remind me. Bryce.
Who, what, when, and where.
And why. Very good, very good. Who, what, when, where, and why. Very good. So these questions take us into the text. They make sure we know what's going on in this story. If you can answer factual questions, you're comprehending. Okay, so those are the first type. We want to try to avoid these types of questions today. Okay, the other 2 types of questions that we're going to work with are our higher order questions. They're the ones that really get our brains turning, and they're the ones that get us really kind of involved with the story. So the second type of question are inductive. You're using your reasoning to come to the answers for them. Okay, they're the almost there questions. They're in the text, but they're not necessarily who is this, what did she do. They're the deeper types of questions, the why and the how and the so what. Okay, so what that these people choose someone to kill every year? Well, we've got to think about that. What is important about that? They take these questions take readers through the text. They help us to evaluate and interpret it. Is this a good story? Have we learned a moral lesson? Those are the types of questions that type 2 are answering, or that type 2 are. Type 3 are the most complex, and they're the ones that you really can't get to until you've read the whole story, until you've read a couple of things, until you can make connections to the text, to other texts, to ideas or other situations through analysis. Like Kristen did an excellent job with that in her response, because she connected it to Antigone, right? Or you can connect it to another story you've read, or a news report that you've heard. And you're going to analyze that. And that's what y'all were practicing. Hey, Matt, I'm going to just come and sit. Why don't you sit behind Jonathan? Okay. That's what I asked you to analyze in your essay that you wrote for your novels. And I've read a lot of them, and they're really good. So you guys, I think we're going to be able to come up with some good type 3 questions. They asked questions like, how are these things similar, different? How are they related? And they take readers beyond the text. So they let us kind of analyze this text in the bigger picture. What does this mean for us? Okay, so we're going to practice coming up with those 3 types of questions today. Okay, so we're going to come up for each chunk. There are 6 chunks in our story. For each chunk, we're going to come up with a higher order question. So either a type 2 or a type 3 for each chunk. And I'm going to do the questions for chunks 1 and 2 so that you can kind of see how to do it. All right, to do this, we've got to reread the story. So I need a volunteer to start and read chunk 1 for us. Would someone like to read chunk 1? Griffin? Okay.
The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square between the post office and the bank, around 10 o'clock. In some towns there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 26th. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner.
Very good. Okay, so this time on the second reading, I'm kind of underlining and paying attention to the date. The date is obviously key. It's June. And that they do all of this in time to be home for lunch. So this is something that happens. It's quick, it's short, and they're done and over with. And did they tell us what time? Oh yeah, around 10 o'clock. So around 10 o'clock in the morning they meet and they're done with this within 2 hours to be able to get home for lunch. Good. Do you want to keep reading, Griffin, please?
The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play, and their talk was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers pronounce his name Delacroix, eventually made a pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking amongst themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brother or sisters.
Good. Okay, so this second reading, I've noted down things like the boys are already getting ready. They've already collected some stones. We don't know why the first time around when we read this.
Surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet and they smiled rather than laughed.
Okay, so let's look on this second reading. We're trying to get some more notes down. So first of all, I'm not sure if we did this last time, but I'm noting that this is a farming community because in my prior knowledge, it seems in farming communities, from what I've read and studied, and also being from a farming community, having grown up in one, I know that summer festivals happen. You know, in the summer you have the Blueberry Festival. You have, and when it gets a little later, you have, you know, the harvest festivals with the corn mazes and all of that thing. So this is this is a farming community here. So I'm going to try to make the connection between some kind of festival or event is happening here, maybe having to do with them being farmers. It seems at this point, you know, the men, I thought this was interesting, the men smile rather than laugh. So this isn't, even though it's a holiday atmosphere for the kids, there's maybe something that's a little unsettling, something's not quite right with the adults. And then come our two of our big characters. The first is Mr. Summers, and I am thinking that his name is going to be, I've read the story, so I know Mr. Summers is in charge of basically what? The whole lottery system, which means what is he really in charge of? Yeah, death. Okay, he's the man in charge of death. But yet what are the connotations behind the word summer, right? Fun, life, excitement. So I thought his name is a little ironic here, that has this name Summers and he's in charge of really death. But the other thing that's not ironic, that's kind of right there for us, is that the other man in charge of this lottery is Mr. Graves. And what does grave mean? Well, literally it can mean the grave that you go in when you die, the place where you go when you die. What is the meaning of, does anybody know grave when it's an adjective? What that means? Jasmine?
Like, is it like not cloudy, but like really like somber, like really death, not death, but you know, it's
Somber,
really
yes.
lifeless pretty much.
Griffin, what were you going to say? Okay, grave means somber or serious. So there's two connotations here. There's the actual place where you go when where your body goes when you are dead, but it also means somber or serious. Okay? So we've got these two men, one named Mr. Summers, one named Mr. Graves. And so my question for this story, for this chunk, my question two, my type 2 or type 3 question is, I'm going to ask a inductive. I'm going to do a type 2 for this one. So my type 2 question for this, let me get my paper out, is for chunk 1. So you guys write it too, so we have our questions. For me, my question is, what is the significance behind the names of the men who run the lottery? Is his name Graves or Grave? Graves. Okay? So mine is a type 2. And I can really ask this question because we've read it once. Right? When you read it the first time, it's just their names. But thinking about it and going back and remembering what's going to happen, that helps me to get this type 2 question. Okay, we're going to do one more chunk together, and then I'm going to have you guys practice making up these questions. I think that pointing out that name first kind of gets their gears turning, and they feel, oh yeah, I can see this, because those names are there. It's right there that she would choose Summers and Graves for those characters, but the kids don't have that much practice with finding irony in the text and kind of looking at that. So by broaching that subject first, I think it warms them up and gets them thinking more deeply into the text right away. So from the beginning, they're kind of, it's not just a black box. What else could that black box be? Their names, those are not just names that she randomly chooses. I mean, they're named that for a reason. So I think it helps them, again, kind of dive into the text a little easier, more easily than if I had just been like, okay, read it and make some connections. All right, who wants to start chunk 2? Jonathan? Okay, please.
The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box.
Okay, so at this point we can start looking at the box as a symbol of something, right? We've practiced symbol a little bit. So if I'm the student and I'm thinking about this, all right, this box, no one wants to mess with this box because of the tradition, and I'm thinking, all right, I've read the story, I know what comes out of this box. Death, right? So can the box be a symbol of death? It could, the box of death. So I put this down, did we already mark this down as in our margin as a note? Okay, so our box could be a death, and let's put symbol here. And I'm going to put a question mark because we're not quite sure. On the second study, you can't be quite sure. You've got to think about it a little more. Good. That was good. A good job reading, Jonathan. Thank you. All right, next paragraph. Volunteer. Someone want to get on? Sierra, you're a good reader. And you're right there. Please.
Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations.
So for me, again, as I'm reading this, I find it interesting that this box holds so much significance, and yet, how do they treat it? Like trash, they discard it like they don't care. So I put, nobody seems to want or care about this box. What could that, I'm going to put a question mark here. Make me think. What could that mean? Are they avoiding the concept of death? I mean, they all participate in it, but the fact that nobody seems to really take any care of this really important part of their year is interesting. It strikes me. Good. All right, last and a long passage. Volunteer? Okay, Matthew.
There was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were the lists to make up of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered, there had been a recital of some sort, performed by the official of the lottery, a perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off duly each year. Some people believed that the official of the lottery used to stand just so when he said or sang it. Others believed that he was supposed to walk among the people.
Okay, so now my turn. I'm going to come up with my question for this chunk. And this right here in this whole chunk really struck me. That there used to be this big ceremony about the box. There used to be this big process. And they've let it slide. So I'm going to ask, again, a type 2 question, because those are the kind for the second reading that I find helpful, and also you pick the easiest way. So for chunk 2, I'm going to ask another type 2 question. And my question this time is, what's the importance? What's the importance of the fact that the ritual opening song and the salute have long been abandoned? Okay, why? Why is that in the story? Why does Shirley Jackson, why does our narrator feel like that part is important? What could it mean? How does it link in with this whole, the lottery? Because we're really examining at what point these people should say, this is not good. And so far, in the first 2 chunks of the story, the first third that we've read, does it seem like these people are really into this? Jasmine?
They seem eager to get it over with.
They seem eager to get it over with, right?
That's probably why they still don't do the rituals. I mean, probably why they didn't do them.
That's excellent. They seem eager to get it over with. So would this help? If we were trying to analyze the story and prove that these people don't really want to be doing this, would this fact be a good support for that? Yes, I think so. I think it would be a good proof that these one of the many things showing that they really don't want to be doing this. Okay, so now it's going to be your turn, and I'm going to put you into groups. We have, how many chunks left? We have 4 chunks, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We've got 4 chunks left, so I'm going to put you into 4 groups. And in your groups, you are going to be in charge of reading your chunks, and then coming up with, as a group, I'm going to come and I'm going to give you a sticky note, each group. As a group, you're going to come up with 1 question for your chunk, just like I did, a type 2 or a type 3 question. Once you get towards the end, people with the latter chunks, you could probably come up with something to connect. Okay, so a type 2, an either inductive or an analytical question. And then we're going to share these with the class. So again, here is your task. Listen up for the directions. Okay, as a group, so you guys, Griffin's group is chunk 3, Bryce is chunk 4, David's is chunk 5, and y'all are chunk 6. Okay, so as a group, you're going to read your chunk. So pick volunteers to read together. Hold on. You're going to mark anything new in the text that you feel is significant that you should be text marking. And then you're going to together come up with a type 2 or a type 3 question, so analytical or inductive. And someone's going to write that question neatly on the sticky note that I bring you. Okay? Are there questions? Did you all finish? Okay, you got the good part. All right, so before you make up your question, what I want you to do is be able to report back to the class what your chunk's about, and I'd like you to give your classmates at least one thing to maybe highlight or note in your chunk, okay? Something new that we haven't done yet. So, and once you've done that, I think it'll be easier for you to come up with a question, okay? And I really would like you girls to try to do a type 3 question, okay? Okay, that's been 5 minutes. Do you need more time reading your chunk? Yes, ma'am. Okay, you're almost done reading. All right, I'm just keeping us on task a little bit. Okay, before you come up with your question, I want you guys to be able to report back to the class what your chunk is about to remind everybody, and I'd like you to be able to give them one thing to underline or one marginal note to take that we haven't done before. Okay? So that, and then your question, and I think you're on the right track with that. Question subject, Sabrina. And I think too, when they were coming up with their questions, one student would start and say, well, I really want to look, how about Old Man Warner? And they would start to phrase the question. Another would jump in and help finish the question, and to see those little like sparks go off where they say, oh yeah, you're right, that's great. I mean, that one student individually might not have come up with such a great question, but together, you know, more brains together equal, I think, greater things. All right, girls, you have a type 3 question. You're doing your link between Antigone, right?
We're trying to figure out how to word this.
Okay. All right, what do you want to say? What is really the question you're asking?
Why? No, I don't see that.
You want to do something with the fact that they're hesitant to start, which indicates that they are not.
We're trying to compare it to like how Mrs. Hutchinson says it's like unfair and all that to her death and stuff. Like Antigone when she was about to die.
Are we like asking why doesn't anybody speak up about why it's wrong?
Yeah.
Like in Antigone, Antigone's the only one who speaks up about the Creon's law being wrong. Why doesn't anyone in this, why isn't there an Antigone in this story? I think you can do that. Okay. Okay, very good. Nice connection there. Excellent. But every student has 3 main reading goals. They're to mark the text, question the text, and also take annotations. So that's something we've done from day one, and I almost always try to furnish them with a text that they can mark up. And if they can't write in the text, I give them sticky notes, and they've gotten really good at, you know, by the end their books or their stories will be covered in sticky notes that they've just put all over to take notes and mark the text. All right, when you have your question, come up and stick your question in your right chunk. Put your sticky in your right chunk. And we are going to teach each other now. Okay. We're taking baby steps with this. So first, all right, group 6, they're still working on theirs. They had a hard one. All right, chunk 3, who is your representative who's going to come up here and remind everybody about what this is about and show your section that you annotated? So everybody needs to turn back to chunk 3 so that you can get ready for this. Who's going to be your speaker? Not Griffin. Griffin always gets volunteered. So someone besides Griffin is coming up for chunk 3 to be the teacher today. Okay, Jordan. Come on down. You got to have whatever note, you're going to show your notes of whatever you annotated there. So bring your passage. All right, guys, everybody on chunk 3? Jordan's our teacher for this chunk. He's going to give you something new to note down or annotate.
So, chunk 3, you want to like read it out loud?
Your part? The whole chunk? No, you don't have to read the whole chunk. Just tell them what it's about and then say what you...
So pretty much what our chunk was about, the people in the village were preparing for the event to start, and they were waiting for everybody to get there, making sure everybody was there, so they wouldn't leave anybody out when they started. Pretty much what we focused on was whether this event was important or not. When we were reading, Miss Hutchinson showed up late, and when she got there, she said she clean forgot what day it is. We pretty much said, based on what they do on this day, did she really forget, or did she purposely almost miss the event and try to get out of it? Because think about it. If it's Christmas or something, whatever kind of holiday, if it's a big holiday, people remember what day it is, and they're not going to forget. But with a holiday like this, we thought, did she really actually forget it, or did she mean to not be there? And then, so we underlined where she said, Clean forgot what day it was.
So you guys follow him, right? He's your teacher, so you underline what he underlined.
And then later, we got up to where they were about to start, and Mr. Summers said, guess we better get started, get this over with, so we can go back to work. Anybody ain't here? What we got from this, he's running the lottery, but at the same time, he still, from his words, he seems like he doesn't even want to be there. He says, okay, let's just get this over with and go home. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. So, our overall question.
Yes, I have it.
Okay. Based on the tone and dialogue from the villagers, is the holiday important? And if we had to answer our own question.
You don't have to answer your own question yet.
Oh, we don't have to answer it?
You don't
Okay.
have to answer your own question yet.
Well,
excellent.
That's for y'all.
Okay, good. So their question is, based on, how did you phrase it? Based on the tone and the dialogue from the villagers, is the holiday important? Excellent question. Excellent question. Let's give Jordan a round of applause and group Chunk 3 a round of applause. I think that in one way we've been practicing this all year. I don't let them just say, well, because it says it right here. You need to be able to verbalize that. You need to be able to come up with your own opinions and feelings about these texts. And I think also our students are good, my students are good at avoiding the right there questions, that they know that's too easy. It's too easy to ask those right there questions. So again, why do we read literature? It's to make you a better human being, to make those connections between yourself and the people you're reading about. And I think that when you frame it in that light, that it becomes easier for them to get these higher order questions. I mean, some of the questions they were coming up with, I was really impressed with. And making the connections between, the Hunger Games is the hottest thing right now. And to connect that to the lottery, I didn't even see that coming. And I just think I always learn things from them. And I know that I'm going to save these sticky notes and put them in my folder, and the next time I teach this story, I'm going to use some of those questions to kind of get this conversation going. All right, Sabrina with Chunk 4.
All right, so what Chunk 4 was about mainly was that they were drawing the names, and with every person that they would call, like if for Mr. Summers, it gave like a brief description of how he felt, and then whenever the woman was going up for her husband, it gave how she felt and how the women were reacting towards her, like, go on, Janie, you got this, things like that. That's just basically what it was about. And what we underlined, because we found this to be rather important, Old Man Warner, he's kind of like the stuck-up old guy that's all about tradition. That's how I view him. And what I underlined was Old Man Warner, who stood next to him, that over in the North Village, they're talking about giving up the lottery. We found that to be of some importance. It's right there, with the bold underlining. Because it's breaking the tradition, and this entire story is about tradition. And the question we asked was, let me ask it to you. What is the importance of the northern villages wanting to quit the lottery?
I think that's good. Why? Why do they want to quit this lottery? What's the importance? Why the northern villages? And now this is a great question. This is a type 2, but I think this could also be a type 3, because if we use, those of you who have studied history, and you'll get into this a little better next year when you study your American history, what tends to happen first in the northern parts of America? What tended to happen first? Jasmine. in general, like in our own history.
They would change first, like things would happen first because it would come to them first. Just like with, no offense, but with shoes, it gets there first and then we get it second.
That's right, okay. Technology, development, and when we were an agrarian society, when America was mostly made up of farms, the North is the area that changed first because ideas came to them first. That's where the big cities were. They were the ones who industrialized first. And the South clings to its, they call it's the term Southern bumpkin for a reason, because the South tends to cling to the traditions and get changes more slowly than the northern areas of America. So I think this could be both a type 2 and a type 3 if we want to draw in our previous knowledge. Excellent, good job. Let's give Chunk 4 group a round of applause, please. First, I think that they need to be able to speak in front of groups. They need to be comfortable in front of the classroom. That is not something I would do in the second week of school. I would not expect every group to be able to send someone up and be comfortable with it. You have to build that sense of community in the classroom and build the sense of safety, that I'm going to be okay up here if I make a mistake. People are going to feel me, they're going to laugh with me or be supportive of me. And I think too that, again, it comes with a lot of teacher modeling. I even notice while they're standing up there, they do a lot of what I do. Like they make sure it's filmed, they stand, they face the crowd, they go back. So they've seen me up there so many times that I think and they know that their classmates are supportive, that there's not a lot of fear about getting up at this point. But I also for today's lesson, I let them choose who was going to come up and speak. Sometimes and often another way to get them really comfortable being in front of the classroom is I do destiny slips, where I basically put all their names in a hat, and I have silly hats for it, and I pull a name out, and that's your destiny, is to speak in front of the class today. So we do that often as well. So I'll tailor it to the lesson. But because this was a new thing, I have not asked them to make up their own questions before. I didn't want to force a child who is not really comfortable speaking in front of the class to come up here and present their chunk. So I let the kids kind of decide who was going to speak. Each group, you are going to come up with a question for each chunk. One question, I'm going to bring you more sticky notes. You're going to come up with one type of question. It can be either a 2 or a 3. Okay, I'd like each group to come up with at least 2 type 3 questions. So you're going to have at least 2 type 3 questions, and the rest can be type 2 if you wish. But every group is going to come up with a question for each chunk, and when you get them, you come and stick them up here.
Usually when you think of lottery, you think of winning money, but then it's making a big deal about the pile of stones. Yes. So you could be like, well,
what do the stones
what do the stones represent in the lottery?
Yeah, I thought it represented money.
Type 2, what do these stones have to do with, because it's not right there in chunk 1 what they have to do with the lottery, so that's not a right there question. It would be a type
What's the significance of the stone in the lottery? Okay, that's the question.
Yeah, I think that's good. Okay. Okay, are you done with chunk 1 question? Come and put it up. 1 question per sticky. 1 question per sticky. So bring your chunk 1s up here and then go to chunk 2. How are you guys doing? Good? What was your chunk 1? The foreshadowing? Excellent. Very good. Okay, chunk 2 is what? The box. Okay. Describing the box. And we have the importance of I didn't even do a question with the box, so why don't you guys make up a question for the box? Okay? How's chunk 2 going? Group work engages students better, I think. 2, it allows everyone to contribute. You do notice that in the groups there's the 1 or 2 kids who always do the speaking, but when I'm moving around, I'm making sure that this boy says at least one thing today, that he's going to give one contribution to the group. And also in classes where you group often, they're used to that. And I was circulating with my clipboard because I give points, take notes while they're speaking. So if a kid is refusing to participate in group work, well, he knows that his grade's going to be lower than his group mates that day. So I think 1, it helps to engage them better. 2, it puts the burden of responsibility on them. They can't just sit there and do nothing. It's not like in an individual desk, a student could choose not to answer the questions. But when you're faced with your peers who are looking at you, it's really hard to say, I'm not doing that. So, and also it also creates, I think, a supportive environment, because the kids do know at this point who's shy, who doesn't participate that often, and they will kind of help to coax some of those answers out. All right, so while my last group is finishing up their chunk 6, here's our next activity, okay? We have 15 minutes left, which is perfect. We're gonna go through these questions and look and see how many are showing up, are repeating themselves, and then your last task, your exit slip today, is going to be to choose one question and answer it. So as we're going over these, I want you to be listening carefully, thinking about it, because basically what we're gonna do now is we're going to go through our questions, see which ones are asked the most, and those are the ones that are going to stay, because those are the ones that will seem to be the most relevant and prevalent, right? The ones that you want to really know the answers to. Okay, so for chunk 1, our first question, the one I made up, was what is the significance behind the names of the men who run the lottery? What is that? Summers and Graves. What could the meaning behind that be? All right, our next question for chunk 1 is what is the significance of the annual gathering in the village? Because when we read chunk 1, in that chunk, we're not quite sure what's happening there yet. So what is the significance of this gathering? If we were typing this, what type of question would this be? A 2 or a 3? This is a type 2. Very good. Okay. Next question. How does the description of the kids gathering the stones foreshadow the final events of the story? So gathering the stones, how is that foreshadowing? Excellent. Is this a 2 or a 3? This could be a 3 because we're having to connect several parts of the text together. 2 or, I don't know, what do we think? The foreshadowing, other events? It's probably a 2. This is a 2. Yeah, to use the term foreshadowing, I mean, we haven't talked about foreshadowing in a long time. I was even impressed with the connections they were making to Antigone, because Antigone was something we studied in the first quarter. So we were reading that back in September, and they're talking about it today as if it were fresh in their memories. So that made me really happy as well. I wanted them to make the connection to Antigone. That was my hope. When I designed this lesson as well, we had finished Antigone, and I thought, oh, I want to connect these in. So, you know, I'm just constantly surprised by them and impressed with what 16-year-olds can do when given the opportunity, and I think that's the key. A lot of people think teenagers, meh, but they're great. They're almost adults, and they will really impress you if you give them the chance. So we have 3 types of questions dealing with the abandonment of the rituals. Why is that significant? Dealing with some being given up but some not, especially the box not being able to be changed. And then lastly, what does this box symbolize? Excellent questions. All which type of question? Type 2 or type 3? Type 2. All type 2. Good. All right, chunk 3. This is a good one. In relation to the Hunger Games, why does age play an important role in the drawing of the lottery? Nice. There's a connection. What type of question is this? 3. Type 3. Excellent. Very good. Are good. And we spent an hour and a half coming up with these questions and learning how to do it. And I want to lend validity to that this wasn't just a pointless task. I mean, your questions are good. And it was interesting to me when I walked around to see which ones they were choosing. Ones that as a student I would never have picked. I mean, some of the kids were picking the hard ones, connecting Creon to Old Man Warner. I mean, no way. I would not do that as a student. So I really like seeing that, that your questions are important, you are smart and intelligent, and now let's let everybody else kind of work with what you've come up with. These are excellent questions. And for your final task, as an individual task, you are going to pick one question from any chunk, and you're going to answer it, and you're going to use textual evidence to do so. Okay? So, I want textual evidence. Yes? No, just one question in general. If you want to come back up and review the questions, you can. Can you give me an SRE paragraph for this, please? So, in a beginning, an opening statement, your reasoning, and your explanation. So you can come up and review the questions, and you're going to write it right on your paper where you were writing the questions down. You can use that same piece of notebook paper, okay? The focus of today's lesson was to get the students to think more deeply about a story and to come up with higher level questioning, questions that weren't just right there in the text, because that tends to be what we gravitate to because that's the easiest. But as educated, thinking individuals, they need to be able to go deeper into a story and get the most out of it. So my goal for that lesson was to get them to understand the different types of questions that you can ask about a text, and also to have some practice with formulating those questions themselves.